Good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters of the Eastern Upper Peninsula. We welcome you to this evening's conversation with Mike Heise, CEO of Cloverland Electric Cooperative. I'm Linda Stoetzer, your moderator for the event. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization more than 100 years old. We neither support nor oppose any candidate. We do not take positions on any subject without a thorough study. Our organization believes in diversity, equity, and inclusion. For further information, visit the League's website at LWVMI.org. I'm very sorry for all of the confusion for this, mostly on my part. Anyway, the format for this webinar is designed to provide you with answers about the recent demand charge of Cloverland Electric. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section and they will be addressed. Priority will be given to questions directly regarding the demand charge. I invite Heidi Watucky to introduce Mike Heise, who is our speaker for the evening. Heidi, unmute yourself and make an introduction for Mike, please.
If not, I can do it. I know myself pretty well.
Please do that, Mike. I just welcome you this evening and I appreciate you being here. Mike is the CEO of Cloverland Electric Cooperative. So Mike, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, first off, for having me today. Definitely, we appreciate the opportunity, if there's questions, to be able to work together to work through them. But yes, my name is Mike Heise. I'm the president of Cloverland Electric. I've been here now for about 4 years. But my passion and energy lies in the energy sector. So I have been in the energy space since about 1988, when I graduated from high school. I took a job and worked for the first energy companies in Ohio. So I worked for Toledo Edison, Cleveland, worked through the whole network of all their mergers and acquisitions. So I got to see the investor side of life. Worked for municipal electric for a few years. And then I worked for a joint action agency of the state for the municipal world at Ample, Ohio, where I was their vice president of technical services. Then I moved to a job in Cleveland where I ran an independent company that did energy for Case Western and university hospitals in the Cleveland area. So I did that for about 12 years while I was raising my children. And then worked for AEP a little bit, and that brought me here today to Cloverland as a great opportunity. So always had desires to be in the cooperative world because, again, I've got to see all different sides of the table, from investor-owned munis, and my space always has been in going home every night feeling like you've accomplished something. When I've worked for investor-owns, you went home understanding that the shareholders got a good margin of what you put into your day. And to me, right now we have 30-some thousand investors here up in the UP that are my bosses, if you will. So my background is I'm a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from University of Toledo, state registered professional engineer as well too. So again, passionate about what I do, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Mike. To start off with, please tell us the reasons for the demand charge and some of the specifics about how it works.
Sure. Can I share my screen? Is that going to be possible?
Yes. I don't know how to do that, but help yourself.
I will figure it out here briefly. So let's just do it this way. Share. Open this. All right. Can we see my screen?
I can, yes. Thank you.
So what I did was, and I apologize, I wasn't exactly sure every question you had. So one of the things I wanted to just maybe briefly do is walk through. This was a abridged version of the PowerPoint we did last summer when we toured across the different districts we have. to maybe give you a little bit of an idea of like how we got to the point that we're at today. So if I'll try to walk through this pretty quickly so I can get back, Linda, right to your question. But
Okay.
give a little bit of background to it. So again, who is Cloverland, right? We were established in 1938 as electric cooperative. We have about 43,000 meters that we serve with about 34,000 members across our 5 counties. So again, the disparity between the two numbers is that we have 34,000 members, but some members have more than 1 meter. And again, we maintain over 4,000 miles here in the UP. One of the other things that's unique about us, we also serve 58 islands, definitely far more than any other cooperative in the nation. Understanding that we're electric cooperative, we're a little bit different, right? We serve by member support and member derived guidance. So if you look at how we're governed, we basically have 3 districts across our service territory. And in each district, we have 3 different board members. So we have District A, which is more down in the St. Ignace area. So we have William Lalonde, Jason St. Ange, and Jerry Nettleton, who are our directors there. John Saruk, Karma Bonacci, and Jason Oberly and B up here in the Sioux area. And then to our west, it would be Ron Provo, Virgil Monroe, and Kevin Vanetta. So each year, 1 director is up for re-elections from each district as well. So they serve 3-year terms, and ultimately every year we have election for 1 seat. But they are our Public Service Commission. So while there's a little bit we have to do with the Public Service Commission, the majority of what we do is self-governed here by these 9 individuals that you see here on the screen. So we are, again, a little different, but we control our own destiny, if you will. So one of the things I think we should be proud of that not too many people realize is that we are one of the cheapest rates in the state. If you look at this, I know the writing's probably small, but I highlighted where we stand. If you look at the very bottom there, Cloverland right now, this was back on data from 2020, and our rates haven't changed since 2017, but more than likely the rest of them have. And you can see where we fall on the list is on the very bottom of the list at about 12.89 cents per kilowatt hour for residential. The only one that was lower than us was Northern States Power. They're a very small investor owned to the west. So again, when you look at where we stand in comparison to the rest of the state, we are one of the lower cost utilities. If you recall back, the state had done this UP Energy Task Force, and they were looking at how to lower costs up in the UP. I'm very proud of what I have the opportunity to be here today to talk to you is that, we have done a lot that we can to get to the point where we'll unfortunately have to say the word rate increase, but we've done everything that we can to kind of forego that for as long as possible. And others in particular, it's no secret if you look at UPCO, Upper Peninsula, they were roughly 22.5 cents a kilowatt hour. They right now are asking the Public Service Commission to give them a 15% increase to their rate. So as you look at kind of the markets and how things are going, almost everyone on this list right now is asking for a rate increase as well, and much larger than what we have. For example, Cherryland, who's just right above us, they are right now putting a 7% rate increase in place. So we're all unfortunately in this boat where, costs have gone up significantly that we have to look at how we can continue to provide the services that we need to make sure that when you flip that light switch, that it turns on. So when I first started, again, 4 years ago, if you look at our health, our financial health with Cloverland was not in the greatest of positions. So when you look at what we call an equity ratio, it's kind of our FICO score to the cooperative world, cooperative banking world. So the USDA and RUS is kind of where we get our money from. So they base everything on the equity ratio, which really is the amount of money we borrow from our membership versus how much we borrow from the market. So when you look at where we stand, we were less than 20% when I first started. And by RUS USDA standards, that was kind of considered penalty rating to a point where we had to ask for their blessing to hand back out capital credits. So prior to me getting here, one of the things is we were right on the edge of penalty rating, if you will. And we quickly, through a lot of things that we've been working on together here, got our equity ratio up from 2019 all the way up through 2021 to 30%. So it took us from a penalty rating to now not perfect, but definitely a much better position to be able to allow us to think differently than we could before. So again, for the past 4 years, I've been here looking for many different ways to find a way to improve how we generate cash and how we spend it, ultimately to get our financial position more healthy. So one of kind of the key items that we did is looking at our generation. And one of the things in particular, so if you look at from a cash perspective, one of the things that sets, again, Cloverland apart from many of our other counterparts is, we generate electricity through our hydro. We also have the Corps of Engineers hydro. So roughly about half of what we need is actually generated from the two power plants over the year. So when you look at that, we provide a lot of renewable energy credits. So that's kind of the industry's way of saying that you generate renewable energy and you have a credit associated with each one of them. Well, the state only requires that we have 15% renewable energy in our portfolio. So kind of a way to help get us more healthier, we have been selling kind of those energy credits into the market that are not required. So for example, when you look at 19, 20, and 21, those 3 years alone, selling the excess credits that we generate back into the market generated us over 1.2 million in those 3 years. In 2022, the markets kind of really grew, and we sold a little over $1 million RECs for 2022. So again, as I started, I just told the board, if we wanted to make the message out to our membership that we are so much renewable, those are some of the costs that we have. But right now, trying to get us to a financial healthy position, that's why we chose to sell these renewable energy credits back to generate cash flow. And also with that, as we were getting healthier, one of the things that when I first started, we were in that penalty rating, meaning that we couldn't pay back the capital credit obligation that we had to our members. So this excerpt here was a part of our strategic planning discussion with our board, is to just say, right now we've grown over the last, so in 2020 and 2021, we started growing our capital credit program to start paying it back to our membership. And all I was trying to show our board members here is the goals that we had established was no more than a 30-year payback schedule. And so when you look at where we stand in 2021 with a $750,000 capital requirement, we essentially still kept us at a 26-year obligation to have to pay. And what I was just trying to show the board here is if we just held it at the 750,000 mark and kept it there until our power supply contract ends in 2029, we can actually keep our kind of backlog, if you will, fixed, with the hope that in 2029, when we enter into a different power supply world, we can save money over what we're paying today. And those savings could then ultimately start increasing that amount that we pay back to our members for the capital credit program. But prior to 2020, we were in a penalty rating and we couldn't really pay it out as well. So we had to suspend that program. We're back. Now I've had other members approach me and say, well, maybe we need to start borrowing money in order to actually pay those capital credits back. And it's a philosophy difference. My view is, you don't pay one credit card with another credit card. So to me, we should really be saving our borrowing or our debt to fix things that are broken within our system. And that's kind of the conversation that came around with this slide here, was just to say, right now, while it's not where some members would like the number to be, we're making steps in the right direction to be able to pay that back. And again, we did all of this without a rate increase. But understanding that when COVID hit, a lot of things started changing. We deferred some more maintenance. And ultimately, when you look at, we're in a very unique position here up in the UP, really heavily snow, ice dependent on, the bad weather basically forces us to have some inclement weather that really can bring down power lines. So one of the things we did look at is over the years, because we were in kind of a rough financial position, that ultimately we need to start spending money back to reinvest, so that over time, the old poles that are breaking every time that the ice and snow load or trees fall on them, hopefully then we can work on a reliability as well too. So again, looking kind of at the whole picture of Cloverland, we have a great system here, but we need to continue to reinvest in ours. And that's why kind of looking at the capital credit program, my view was we really need to save up the debt that we have in order to actually reinvest it back in our system. And the other part that is a bit challenging for us is we are heavily debt loaded as well. So when I first started, we were roughly around, I believe, $145 million in debt. We were able to pay off over the last 3 years and not take on any more debt, somewhere around $15 million. So we're working to pay down our debt load. So again, when you look at where we stand today, I'm pretty proud of everything that we've been able to accomplish, working with our board, working with our staff to get to be able to say that we paid down $15 million of debt. We've been able to boost our capital credit program, and then ultimately still keep the level of service to our membership the way it is without having to raise rates. But now looking at how things have been over the last couple of years, we all are feeling the pinch of the kind of unique political world that we live in right now. So you look at what inflation has done to us. These are just a couple of different examples, but one that's pretty powerful to me is because we all see that, right? We need the electricity to our home. So we all have a transformer, typically either in our front yard or in our backyard hanging on a pole, that ultimately then feeds the electricity to our home. So the one in particular, if you think back in 2020, we were paying $700 for that transformer. And in 2022, we're now paying $1,922. So roughly, when you look at the cost, has gone up significantly for a lot of the things that we've done. And so when you look at where we stand today, we were able to ride through a majority of a lot of these, but we're to a point now where if we want to continue to strengthen our organization, meaning that, start working back on our capital programs, that's why we're here today looking at the rate increase that we put in. And the last kind of component, just to kind of show you my focus, right? When I first started, there was a lot of confusion. A lot of our cost expenditures that we were looking at I called them more of the pennies, right? So what I was trying to show with this slide is that when I first started, I think been here 6 months, and I was asked to speak at an economic development function. And I said, look, the common phrase to most is if you take care of the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. And based on this, my view was we really have to flip that saying from Cloverland's perspective and from members' perspective, because if we could take care of the dollars, the pennies really just don't matter. And when you look at the graph, what I was trying to show here is power supply cost by far is one of our largest costs. So in 2021, if you look at our overall budget when it was completed, 56% of our budget comes from paying for power supply. The other part that, again, is really not controllable is interest, tax, and depreciation. So if you just look at the blue colors or the backwards Pac-Man there, you can look at roughly 75% of every dollar that we collect goes to things that we don't have control over. So again, back to my point of if we can control the dollars, then some of the pennies just don't make as much in the bigger scheme of things. Our savings and our value can come from that. So what are some of the things that we've done? Again, our power supply contract ends in 2029. And ultimately, our hope is at that point, we can kind of look for new power supply arrangements that can save money. Some of the things that we've been doing every month, the board hears me talk about how we're continuing to fight with our power supply contractor, consultant, or supplier, if you will, Wisconsin Electric. Just looking at ways that we can keep the bills honest from them. 2 years ago, we took them to federal court, asking them for a lowering of a return on investment calculation. So they were getting roughly 12% return on every dollar. So we beat that down to about 9.8%, which saved roughly somewhere between $200,000 to $300,000 a year between now and the end of the contract. That's an annual savings. Annually, we're looking at our rates with Wisconsin. They file a tariff that they end up charging us. We fight that. We're right now working on that fight for last year's rates to see if we can get some money back as well too. So again, when you look at the bigger scheme of things, they're really large dollars. And so that's where my focus has been, because if we can take care of those dollars, then ultimately, it ends up, providing the benefit. And really the benefit that we have is we've had 5 years without a rate increase. And I believe, we're asking for a fair increase at right around 5%. And how do we get there? We had broken units at DAFTA. We fixed those units. We've been looking at, we added 7 megawatts of solar that right now Wisconsin's fighting me back on and saying I can't take it. We've been looking at hydro production. And one of the other things we've done is we brought a chief operating officer on as well too, to help me get through some of these things that we're looking at as how we can continue to look at our contract creatively and find some ways to kind of beat down that price and keep it more stable than what they would really like to charge us. So now to the question at hand, how did we get to where we're at with the new rate structure? So we brought in a consultant, and consultant basically, as you're looking at a cost of service study, by definition, you really would like to, at the end of the day, break out your charges and have them be truly a cost accounted based on how you spend your money. So if you look to the left here on the slide, this is how Cloverland basically collects its money today. So the blue, or the bottom part, the 72%, is we make through charging you on a kilowatt hour or an energy charge. The rest of it then comes through our facilities charge and our demand charge. But when you look at how we are billed from Wisconsin Electric, again, the portfolio is completely different. So on the right-hand side, you can see as they did their cost of service work, they looked at it and said, okay, the right is how we collect our money, but the left is how we collect our money. The right is how we pay our bills. So when you look at, again, our power supply cost with Wisconsin Electric, when we pay our bill, a large share of that is a demand-related component, and the other pieces are more energy-related. So the philosophy from our consultant was, well, understanding that the markets probably aren't going to change a whole lot, probably get more demand-related, that we should start migrating to a way to utilize that demand for our advantage and for our membership's advantage as well, too. So kind of wrap some numbers or put perspective around it. So when we did the cost of service study, so if you look at 2021, so we pay in 2021, to put the numbers to it, we paid roughly $25 million to Wisconsin for our power supply. Well, when you look at how much of that went to energy and how much of it went to capacity or demand, you can see that of the $24 or $25 million that we paid to Wisconsin, 16 million of it went to that demand or that 1 hour charge that we have to pay. So when you look at how we get billed, it goes back to this slide, right? The difference between the two graphics is, we are heavily charged on that demand related component. And so when they did the cost of service study, this again, if you look at 2022, is no different. If you look at where we ended up 2022, we spent almost $6 million more in 2022 as compared to 2021, just because of the market variations as well. So again, we spent 30 million, but if you look at how much was energy related that we paid them and how much was capacity related, you can say a good share, well over half of what we gave them for capacity charges came from this demand related component. So again, when you look at our mixture, that's why when we start looking at moving forward into the future, how can we better establish a cost of service structure? And that's why then the consultant's recommendation was that we move forward with kind of implementing this demand charge across the board. So again, when the concept of put it together was that it truly reflects our power supply expenses. It helps kind of bring more information or more understanding to the membership on how we pay for it, and then ultimately how we could work together to get to a point where if we do it correctly, we can lower that demand need and ultimately everybody save money. So when we first established the concept, really what happened was right now, depending on the time of year, we peak during the day at a broad range. So to begin with, when we set the parameters of the new rate for this demand component, essentially what the view was is we need to have a broader, and again, with the chief operating officer on board right now, we're starting to look ways through more artificial intelligence where we can start using modeling to kind of narrow that window down to a point where the demand is much tighter, much more manageable. And then by having done that, it allows for essentially members to decide when they want to run things because the cost will be cheaper if they can run it off of peaking hours. So sorry, Linda, it took me a little while to get to your question, but I've tried to simplistically kind of get to, because it is a difficult concept. And again, I've been doing this for 30 years. So to me, it's a little bit different, but kind of walk through the concept of, so how do we determine the demand? I think that's been the number one question that we get is, and the confusion around it is, so it's no different. What we've done on the residential side is no different than how commercial and industrial customers are accounted for today. So demand is really that 1 hour peak usage. So when you think about utilizing your energy in your home, what we've really established is a program where we'll say starting February 1st and ending February 28th, we will go between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. and find that 1 hour within the month that your electric was at its peak. And that's the value that we use in the calculation to provide what your bill would be for that month. So for example, in January, again, remember the I-500 week was bitterly cold. Our January peak for us was in January 31st. And I'm guessing it's either the 2nd or the 3rd in February, because those were some pretty bitter cold days as well. So just to use that as an example, if we had that peak and your peak usage was then at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. on that Friday, we would then use that usage that you had for that 1 hour, and we would multiply that then by the rate to come up with how your bill is calculated, or how that demand portion is calculated. So again, when you look at how our rate is structured, so in that example, so say your hourly usage was roughly 4.4 kW, or you used during that 1 hour, you used 4,440 kilowatt hours during that 1 hour. We would then use that calculation again. So in this example, right, we would take the 4.44 kW, which is that 1 hour usage that you had, and multiply it by the 93 cents. And that would then generate, again, from where it was before to where it is today, roughly a $4.70 increase for a residential customer. So one of the things to point out here is, so when we look through the cost of service study, what you'll see at the bottom there is the current rate. So we were charging roughly 9.3 cents a kilowatt hour, almost 9.3 and a half, if you will, for the energy component. When the cost of service study folks, they just rounded it up a little bit, but basically their view is over time, we should keep that rate frozen and increase the demand charge to more reflect how we pay our bills as well too. And so when the actual rates were developed, that's why we essentially froze the kilowatt hour charge and put all the rate increase essentially into that demand charge. And again, with the concept of when we look at this, then down the road, if we can narrow that window down, and we had a great example last board meeting, a gentleman showed up from, I believe he was in the Rudyard area, not Rudyard, but the Detour, Pickford area. And he's a farmer. And he said, look, I milk, so it's hard for me to not milk outside of that window. And he said, so what I'm really, concerned with is that this is really going to penalize me. And so my response to him was that I understand what you're saying. The hope would be that we can narrow that down to maybe a 2 or a 3 hour window. So now if you are now milking outside of that window, you can not have to have paid a rate increase, because now that load was not on at the time of the peak, and now you save money. And so kind of what hit me is the way I explained it to him then was to think about it this way. So you're concerned with this demand component, but ultimately it starts to change us into what's called time of use, which then allows you to kind of pick when you want to do things because the rates may be a little bit more expensive. But if we don't implement a demand component, then think about how we would have done it in the old school, right? We would have said, all right, we need a 5.5% rate increase. Well, what would we have done? We would have just used this number here and said, your rate was 9.4 cents a kilowatt hour. We're now just going to add 5.5% more to that. So it wouldn't have mattered what time of the day, it wouldn't have mattered any time of, you would have paid that rate increase. But now coming to the new concept of where we're going to say, look, in this rate structure, once we can narrow that window down, you now will have the opportunity to reduce your demand. And if you shift the demand to when we don't peak, we all save money. But in particular, here you can save the money because now you won't be paying as much on that demand component. So again, why did we choose this path? Because it starts to put us down the path where I think we need to head, which is looking at that demand component. Because if you think about it, again, we could have raised rates, just put the 5.5% right into the rate, and you would have paid it no matter what time of the day you used it. We still would have had that rate increase. Here, we're starting to narrow that window down and giving you the opportunity to run it at different times. Why is that important? Because if you hear, and I'm not trying to turn this political, right, but if you listen to any news radio stations, right? There's the new buzzword that's coming out right now is grid electrification. And so when we think about what that means, the things that we're looking at are really demand intensive. So if you think about, there's a big push for broader renewable energy goals. And that's a great concept. But again, think about when a wind blows and when the sun shines, right? You flip your switch on at home, you want that switch to come on when it's dark and not breezy. So ultimately, when you look at it, that's where this demand component is only going to get bigger of an issue for the electric, for those of us that manage the electric grid, because the more renewables you bring on, they're a very intermittent generation source. So it means that that demand that has to be filled in when the wind isn't blowing and the sun's not shining is going to become more of a premium. So again, having the ability to start looking at how the grid is operating, how people get paid for it, then ultimately this is why, to me, I think if we can start getting to ultimately the last bullet there, which is to a time of use rate, then we do truly get to a point where we're true cost accounting for what makes up the bill. So if you're running at the time of the peak, you should pay higher than those that aren't on at the time of the peak. So it's really shedding or putting the charges back to when people are actually using the load. So again, how is it determined? I hope I addressed that right. So it's really, again, it's just that 1 hour peak usage that you've used between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. So it's just one single reading throughout the month that then gets multiplied in through the new rate base, which is 93 cents for that usage. So in this case, that 4.4 would be multiplied by 93 cents. And that's how we would calculate how much that demand component cost you. And again, why is that important? So again, when we talk about grid electrification, the other thing that's big is the big push to switch to electric cars. So think about how much energy these electric cars take. They're pretty demand intensive. So just to give you for example, the chargers over at the Meyer store here in Sault Ste. Marie, they listen to me and they put in smaller chargers, but typically most of these EV chargers that you're going to see at grocery stores are what they call a rapid charger. So they're going to use a lot of energy in a short period of time. So put it in perspective, there are 125 kW chargers. So if 8 cars are being charged at the same time during that 1 hour peak, that would be 1 megawatt. So 1 megawatt costs us $350,000 a year. So to plug that car in for that 1 hour, and if that's the only hour that's charged throughout that month, those 8 cars just cost our membership, because I have to send that check to Wisconsin, basically $350,000 for those 8 cars. So again, when you look at, now that's a gross example, Myers did put a better charging network in that's a lot less energy intensive, and using batteries to help get there. But the point still is, when you look at how demand plays a big role in our world today, it's really only has the potential to grow larger, especially if we're now starting to plug in cars. So as our cost of service study, one of the things we did have the cost of service folks work on is, if members do truly want to transition, what kind of rate structure would we need to look at? So we have put this rate in as well too. And what you'll see there is, because it is such a demand, while the energy component's lower, we try to move that truly to the cost accounting, which is during the time that you're going to run them, and on peak, they're basically, it's a 5 times higher peak capacity rate that you'd pay, because that's kind of what we would pay as well too. So, so at this point, I guess, I will open it to any questions, but again, we're going to continue to help folks understand, because I know it's not an easy concept, but ultimately just understand, there was nothing hidden in the way we're presenting this, but really to move us towards cost accounting. And when we can get to a point where it's time of use, then you can kind of choose how much you want to pay for electricity based on the time that you use it. So with that, Linda, I apologize. I know I took up probably more time than I needed to, but I wanted to give you the rationale or the thinking, because again, it is very radical change to how most utilities do it, but wanted to give you an insight into it. Didn't go light-handed. We did work with the board and our cost of service folks to say that we believe this is the right path once we can get there.
So if I understand you, this is calculated on our personal
Correct.
peak hour, not everybody's peak hour. It's our own peak hour.
Right. Yeah. So like I was starting to show here, right? So if you peaked, you personally peaked that day, but I turned my whole home off, then my number would be lower. It would be based on what calendar day I had it. So if mine was on the 14th, because I just ran everything that day, or I charged my car, right? And so yes, it's your personal peak, no different than a Meijer or a Walmart, right? So we charge them on their monthly 1 hour peak, but they will pay it 24 hours a day. We said with the residential, we need to start narrowing that window down to be able to say, all right, because there's some times of the year when people go into work, they turn everything on. So we peak at 8 a.m. And there's other times where in January, when everybody's coming home after work and cranking their heater up, their demand is more an evening peak. So yes, Linda, you're 100% on. When that calculation is not Cloverland's peak, it's your personal peak.
Okay.
Ultimately, down the road, what we'd like to get is if we can start getting smarter on when that peak is for us, then we can start being smarter on how you have to pay for it. But for us, for right now, this was our way of kind of taking that first bite at the apple to start migrating to that world. Because again, with everything I hope you heard today, the demand component that we pay is huge. And that's where we're just trying to say, to make it fair to everybody, if we now put that demand in and over time, true cost account our rate structure, then down the road, you can say, well, then I'll do my dishes at, midnight. Or if we can narrow the window to 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., then I run my dishes at 3 o'clock and I save money. But I can't get there, right? If I just took the 5.5% again in the old world and just add it to your kilowatt hours, it wouldn't matter what time you charged or what time you did anything, you'd be paying for it anyway. So to me, that's where I think this puts us ahead of other, cooperatives, because we're getting to a point where truly you're paying for how you use your energy. It's just going to take some time to get there without being really radical. And that's why we did just a small increase on the demand side, is to start migrating there. Because again, if you look at how much we pay versus how much we charged, there's still a huge separation, that kind of that Pac-Man chart, if you will.
Okay. So how did you come up with 13 hours? And I might have missed it. You might have said, but I'm still wondering, how did you come up with 13 hours?
Again, we looked at where our peaks are set, right? So there are times in the spring where we as Cloverland peak at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we're paying that demand component, and it goes to as late as 9 p.m. So in January, we peaked, the hours that we peaked were at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So when the cost of service study was done, we as Cloverland will have to pay that peak demand between that window. Those are kind of our average. We really never have peaked at 6 a.m. And we've never peaked really beyond 9 p.m. So that was their first to start with, was let's start with this window. And over time, as we can get smarter, move our peak around and better understand our peak, how we can manage it, then maybe we could trim that window down to maybe a 4-hour window.
Okay.
We had to start somewhere, and that's why it was a broad window, because those are really throughout the year, the 12 months that our 1 hour snapshot that Cloverland pays, which is dictated on how much we pay, can move from anywhere from the 8 o'clock in the morning till about 9 p.m.
Okay. So how long do you anticipate this program going? 2029, when you can renegotiate a contract? Oh, sorry.
No. So, to me, it's not really a program. It's a shift, I think, in the right direction. So again, I could have just taken the kilowatt hour charge and multiplied it by 5.5 cents. But ultimately, what we're working towards is what they again call time of use. So down the road, the hope would be we would raise the charges that we pay on the demand and lower the energy. And so start shifting to get kind of back to this graphic. So let me click on it. Where, in the perfect world, our rates would be established where that demand component now is much larger, but the energy component is much less. So that gives you the reward then to say, okay, so if I'm paying less on a per kilowatt hour basis, so all the kilowatt hours you use in a month, then it gives you personally the incentive to say, all right, well, if now all of us, we could get to a point where we've narrowed that window to 4 hours and you know that, then maybe you don't charge your car during that window if you have an electric car, or maybe you don't run your air conditioning that one day. So there's a lot of things we can do when we get smarter. Some of the co-ops on the South will actually do a texting program and say, okay, today we believe is going to be our peak day. So don't run your air conditioner during this window of opportunity. And now you personally saved, because now you wouldn't have run it during that period of time. So it is a philosophy shift, but ultimately then, it provides the end user, if you are given the resources, to be able to say, yep, I'm just going to turn my air conditioner off for 2 hours. And because if today's just the peak day, then tomorrow I can run it. And so it's giving us better insight and truly putting the costs where they belong. So while this is really not a program shift, it's more of a philosophy shift, so that down the road we can get to that time of use rate where then you have that ability to say, yep, I'm not going to run my washer and dryer until 10 o'clock at nighttime, because now I can save money. But if I go the old school, which is I'm just going to charge your rate 5% more to kilowatt hour, it really doesn't matter when you do it. I would still collect that 5.5, because as soon as you turn it on, you're going to pull those kilowatt hours.
Okay. And I'm asking questions that other people have asked. So please don't take it personally on me and charge me more.
No, fire away.
With the 5% increase, why is this new charge necessary?
Again, it wouldn't be. No, I mean, like we said, right? I could have just, if we were to go like most utilities would, we would have just purely went back to this number here. So if you look at our energy charge, we would have just take the 9.4 cents and we would multiply it by 5.5%, and we would just increase your rate. So we left the kilowatt hour charge flat. And again, to start migrating, we're ramping up the demand charge. So in a perfect world, the next time, say we needed another 5% increase a couple of years from now, we would raise the demand charge and lower the energy charge. So ultimately then you're being rewarded, because if I don't, right, if we don't go to this philosophy, then it doesn't really matter. You're going to pay it anyway. Much like the gentleman that came and said, I milk cows at different times of the day. Well, my point to him was, if I just did the normal thinking, which is to raise it 5.5% on your kilowatt hours, wouldn't matter when you ran it, I'm always going to collect my 5.5%. But if we could get to a point now where if you don't have to milk between, like I said, if we can narrow that window down over time to a 4-hour window, then just don't milk during that 4-hour window. And now you saved money personally, where you can't get that with the normal convention, which is to just flat out raise your kilowatt hour charge.
So are you thinking down the road that you're going to be narrowing this period of time? And of course, my question is, when will that happen?
Well, we're working through where we've again, bringing the chief operating officer on that I have right now. He's got a great background in modeling and artificial intelligence. So that's some of the things we're looking at is, can we get a better handle on predicting our peak with Wisconsin? Because that's the challenge, is we could sit here all day and look at our load and say, okay, yep, it's ratcheting up. We're getting close to our peak. Problem is we don't get billed by Wisconsin that way. We get billed on their peak. So they may peak on a Friday at 9 o'clock at nighttime, and we may, or 8 o'clock, right? And we may actually peak during the day. We get billed on when their peak is. So we have to kind of guesstimate when they peak so that we can, one, turn on our peakers to shave that high capacity charge. But ultimately, so we've, the last 3 months, we've hit our peak, and we had all of our peakers on the last 3 months. And when we're able to run them, we save about $500,000 a month. And so that's $500,000 less that goes to Wisconsin and helps provide data points for us. So our hope is not too long, but I can't really answer, is it a 6 month or a year or 2 years, but I just let you know, this is one of the things we are aggressively going after right now, is to better refine that window. Because if we can, then we can narrow it for our members as well too.
Okay. So this money that's generated from this peak demand, how is it going to be used?
Again, it's no different than if we raised your kilowatt hour charge, right? It's that's why I tried to show here is if you look at in the last 5 years, we've paid significant amounts for increases in everything, right? From payroll to buying goods and services that we have here. A bucket truck, I could throw that on here, how much more we pay for a bucket truck compared to what we did. So in the last 5 years, we've had a lot more expenses. This one to me is also good. So in 2022, we had to give $6 million more to Wisconsin Electric for the power supply costs that we didn't collect a dime for. So we have to take from our operations to pay that bill. So again, when you look at, the concept is I could have just raised your rate, but we created a new vehicle that got us to the same spot, but ultimately is necessary for us to continue to pay these increases that we are getting, but just don't have the means to pass on. So this is no different than a normal rate increase by any utility. We just now have added that as this demand charge, not to the kilowatt hour rate. So if we just think of it as this is still your end rate. So now if you go back and look at this chart here, right? So think of it not as the demand component, but just think of that as part of your bill. So now there's 12.89 cents that you were paying back in 2020. Now is probably going to be 13 cents and a dime or a quarter, right? So just think of it as a different way of us creating the bill, but it's not special money, right? I could have gotten to the same spot by just flat out increasing your kilowatt hour rate by that 5.5%.
Okay, so
again,
it's
you can't control your own destiny. If I didn't go this way, we would have just charged it to you. This would have been flat, and you would have paid that anyway. And all I'm trying to get to is say, all right, if we get smarter, and I know we'll get there. When we get there, then you now have more of a time of use perspective, because that component can be avoided if you're not on at the time during that peak window.
Okay.
So it's really going back to, and that's why I appreciate your indulgence, but that's kind of why I wanted to show you these numbers, right? We haven't raised rates in 5 years. And the big thing really is when you look at what has been the impact of inflation, it's been really significant for us. Those are real dollars I have to pay out for getting the job accomplished. But ultimately, then we haven't had as a rate come back because our rates have been fixed for those 5 years. And then this one, again, to just really put it in perspective, last year we spent $6 million more on power supply. That means that $6 million is not going into putting new poles in, buying new bucket trucks and things that are necessary to make sure when that ice storm comes through, we have the ability to get you back up and running. And so to me, that's really what we did is we just needed a rate increase. It's just, again, confusing, but we divvied it a little bit differently than most utilities. That's what I get back from most of the co-op CEOs I've talked to, like, well, you're kind of bold for doing what you're doing because it's confusing. I'm like, yeah, but it's the right thing in my opinion, because again, I could just raise your rates that 5.5%, you'd pay it in that anyway, and no matter what time of the day. But if we can get smarter and we can get there and narrow that window, now you have that opportunity to say, yep, I want to have my whatever running at that time or not. And now you can control your load a little bit better. Because again, if we go to a grid where everybody's plugging in their car, that demand is only going to get worse. And again, if we switch our grid and we shut down more coal, nuclear, and all the power plants, and everything's on renewable, those that can make energy when it's not sunny or windy outside can drive this price up significantly. So it's going to become a greater factor down the road as far as those can make the capacity are going to really have the ability to drive those prices up. So that's what we just tried to accomplish, is not go old school, but ultimately try something different that down the road, when we get there, then you'll have that ability to be, how do I want to run my personal home, right? Do I want that air conditioner on or not? Because if I turn it off, I can avoid that demand charge. If I run my dishes and my laundry and everything a little bit earlier than that window, then I'm not going to have that on at my peak time. So I truly save money. But again, if I would have just went normal and added the 5.5% to your kilowatt hour charge, you'd pay it no matter what time you ran it.
Okay. Another question, this is from one of our viewers here. How do we know when our peak day is? And then we'll add to that the peak hour.
Well, it's going to be tough for you personally. I mean, if you utilize if you look close enough, right, we have, I'm drawing a blank here, it's getting late in the day, but we have our app that you can use to pay your bill, drawing a blank, but if you use
Smart
our
Hub.
Smart Hub, there you go, thank you. Through Smart Hub, you can actually log in and you can see your hourly usage through there. So while you can't really determine it, we can, and that's how we'll base it, is we'll again go through that, and that's how we've done it so far, is just we're taking all that data and looking for that 1 hour.
Okay.
But again, when we get smarter, and we can now, maybe that's some of the things we're looking at, is so now if we can say, yeah, we now have the ability to think that maybe we're only looking at 5 days a month where we set a peak. If we can get smarter, we can start sending you texts to say, today we think it's a peak day. So it will help you, not to your great point, right? Which is, how do we know if we're setting a peak? Well, but if we know when that peak is and we start narrowing that window, and now we can start using technology to say, yep, we think today's going to be a peak day. You can then say, okay, well then today I'm definitely not going to wash laundry. But if tomorrow's not going to be, then why not go back to normal living the next day? Because I will probably set that peak at the same time.
Okay. To follow up on this Smart Hub, someone has asked us, not everyone has a phone or a computer that shows this. Can it be linked through the internet to a computer that will actually show that? I didn't ask the question, so I can't explain.
I have to get back with you on that, because
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure how that would work, right? I mean, right now, everything is through your own PC. You log in, so it's still dependent on login and credential. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure how that would work. I have to think a little bit more about that.
Okay. Okay. I have some other general questions from people about Cloverland. The minutes from a board meeting. The board meeting minutes that come out in the magazine are and I've never really paid much attention to it, but there are resolutions or whatever that is by number, but it doesn't tell what the resolution or the proposal actually is. Are the minutes or descriptors of this available on the website?
No, not really. Typically, but we're working through board policies right now to basically create a way to look at that differently. So we're looking more at the transparencies of how we can update our website to start putting more on there. So right now, no, I mean, when the board moves a resolution, some of them are big, like this one that we have coming up this week. Tomorrow is really check signers, but there's 6 of them. So they'll just list the numbers, because again, when we post the minutes in the magazine, the longer we make the minutes, the harder it is to manage the magazine, because we're taking up. So if we had meeting minutes and they were 10 pages long, that would take up half the magazine. So it's kind of that dance, or that blend between trying to keep them short enough that we can still get the message across, but without having too many words that it takes from other things within the magazine.
So are those full minutes available on the website?
Yes, we post the same ones that go in the magazine are on the website. Yes.
Okay, but not the complete ones that would have the resolution and all that stuff.
Well, they're by law, they're the same, right? So, I mean, when the board approves a meeting minute, they're the same. Whatever we publish in the magazine is the meeting minutes from that meeting that they certify.
Okay. Someone has asked about recording the meetings because they're work full time, can't get to the meeting, can't watch. Is that recorded somewhere and available from the website?
No, not today. We are, again, as I said, we're working on our policies to start looking at different ways that we can do it. Some of the challenge, to be honest with you, I have is the low tech that we have right now. It is a bit challenging. We use Teams, much like you're using Zoom today. The Teams is working fine, but we, implemented it quickly when we got to COVID, and we're still using the same technology today, which are, I would say, poor quality microphones. I mean, when you call in, it's not the greatest of setup. So for us, it's not, that unfortunately right now the technology is not the greatest. And so, we are working again with the board to start looking at more transparency and how we can get there. So, so I'll definitely jot these down to start working through as well too.
Okay. And then a question about the incentives and the rebates that are available. Is there a way that a member's taxable income could be utilized at all? Because some single income families or senior citizens are unable to afford to upgrade an appliance with the current rebate. But if there was consideration on your part for the income of that person, can that be used?
A great question. I'll write it down. No, I mean, it is a great question because without going too lengthy, one of the things that happened, I believe it was a year ago, the State Public Service Commission mandated that energy optimization on our bills. So we were collecting it. It was a requirement by the state. About a year ago, we were told that cooperatives don't have to abide by that law anymore. So in theory, we could have taken it off the bill, but I told our board, I don't really want to go there just because I know government well enough. If it's a directive or a mandate by them and you now opt out of the program, they're going to ask for you to opt back in again. So what happened was at the point that we were last year, we took the program over ourselves. So we had someone at the state taking care of that program when it was kind of mandated. So to your question, is there flexibility in that? A lot more now than there was before, because we have better control over the program. Now we still have to fit within energy optimization goals, but great question. And I will start thinking through how we can control that money a little bit differently, and maybe look to your point of how there could be different targets as well, that could open up different potential. So right now, do we have it? No, but I hear what you're asking for, and we'll continue to think through how we could maybe accomplish that.
Okay, thank you. And our time is getting very short, so this is going to conclude our event for this evening. I want to thank you, Mike, for being with us and doing your very best to answer our very best questions. Thank you to everyone who attended, and hopefully someone has some new insight that they did not have before. This webinar was recorded and will be available on the League of Women Voters of the Eastern Upper Peninsula YouTube channel. And also a link will be available from our website, which is LWVEUP.org. And again, thank you very, very much, and we appreciate it. And have a good evening.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.